Hello, and welcome to this ANSYS Space Claim reverse engineering tutorial on the skin surface tool, creating boundary patches. If you haven't already, go to File, Open, browse to where you downloaded the file, and you won't see it initially, and that's because the file filter is set to Space Claim files. If you go ahead and change that to all files, you'll be able to see the STL file that you downloaded. Now, if you take a look at this STL, you can see that it's a pretty organic surface. And if you've ever done reverse engineering with SpaceClaim in the past, you might be used to extracting curves and then blending between them. But sometimes that doesn't work too well on more organic things. Instead, we're going to use this skin surface tool. Notice when I hover over it, it says create a surface that approximates the geometry. So let's turn it on and see how we can use it. So the message tells me to create a boundary for the skin, and if I click, it'll add a control point, and if I double click, it'll add a vertice. So let's start by doing that. We can pick any area on the model, doesn't matter which. Maybe I'll start right here by clicking there. Notice this preview that follows my mouse, and now let's see what it means to have control points or vertices. So if I do a single click, notice that it puts a point there, and it keeps this edge or line tangent through that point. If I come over here and I double click, it adds a sharp vertice. Notice those are in blue, but the control points are in yellow. Now, I could add as many control points as I want, or I don't have to add any at all. If I just double click here to put that point, double click here to put that point, and then click on the first point to end it, it'll go ahead and connect those up. Notice we get this web preview showing us the samples that it's going to take. We'll take a look at the options in a minute, but let's see about what happens if I click the check mark. If I go ahead and click the check mark right now, it's going to use 50 samples. That's 50 samples along one edge and 50 samples along this edge, and that's what it uses to create this surface. The higher the samples, the closer it fits. The lower the samples, the looser it will fit. Having lower samples usually makes the surface a little more usable in terms of pulling or cutting with it. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to undo back into before I click the check mark because we want to see about how we can modify this. So right now we've got these four corners and these different control points. Notice that if I drag one of the control points, that edge moves around. I can move it in any direction. I could do the same thing on the vertices. If I zoom in here, I can take one of these corners and move it around so I can put it in the right position. Over here, this isn't looking as straight as I was hoping it to, and you might be thinking, well, I forgot to put in a control point. Well, what's nice is if I just drag somewhere along that edge, it'll go ahead and add a control point at that location. So I could add one there, I could drag over here to add one that way and this way. So even if you don't initially put this boundary in the correct area, it's very easy to adjust either by dragging around the existing control points or by dragging around where there isn't one in order to add it. It is possible that based on where you put it, you may not see that preview anymore. That means it's invalid. So you just want to drag around until you actually see those points. So from here, we could go ahead and click the check mark and let's complete that one. Now, if we look over in this area, it doesn't look like the surface is fitting well to the scan. So let's undo and check out some of the options. Notice the default samples is 50, but the full preview is off. So if we turn the full preview on, we could see the 50 samples and the way it fits to the mesh. So we may want to go ahead and change those samples, increase to the max of 100, and let's see what that looks like. So here we could see way more samples, and when we click the check mark, it is going to fit tighter, but it still doesn't fit perfectly. So we may want to take a look at another sample. So let's undo. I'm going to change it back to 50, and we're going to look at smoothing. So if I turn smoothing off completely, it's going to fit much better because the smoothing algorithm is designed to eliminate noise and bumps and outliers. So here we could see it fits a lot closer. We may want to go to the measure tab and use the grid tool. And here we could really see the curvature. This is a great way to be able to see the curvature when the surface is transparent. So here we could see the grid lying on top of the surface, which is overlapping the mesh. Now let's go back to the STL, and maybe we don't want full smoothing on, but maybe we want to try out some other values, perhaps 50%. So we can kind of do a trial and error, doing different sample counts, doing different smoothing. Maybe more samples with partial smoothing is the way we want to go. Remember that the more samples there are, the more complex that surface is. So we need to do kind of a trial and error balance between the number of samples and smoothing. We could always try doing smaller smoothing percentages. Here you could see that with the 25%, it's getting closer and closer to the actual data. And last but not least, we could do 75 samples with 25% smoothing. And here you could see that it's fitting much closer than before. So the more samples, the closer it'll fit, and the less smoothing, the closer it will fit. Here we could see minimal deviation between the surface and the scan. Let's create another one, but let's do this one a little bit differently. Here, I'm just going to click on this widget to get into a more heads-on view. And instead of picking points, I'm going to do a box select. So I'm just going to drag a box. And based on where I drag, it's going to add both vertices in the corners and control points. Without these control points there, it won't fit the same way. By the way, in addition to adding control points by dragging, and here I'll just drag that one back, I could also select that point and hit delete. So if you select one of these points and just hit delete, it removes it. Notice that you can't delete the vertices, only the control points. So there's this box select method, which is very quick. Instead of picking points, it also gives you kind of a nice uniform boundary. Keep in mind that it's based on your view. So if we look at it like this, that looks straight, but from this angle, it doesn't. So it's always based on your view. So let's go ahead and click the check mark there. Now, there are a few rules when it comes to creating these boundaries. You can have 3 or 4 sides, no more, no less. So if I start mine there, and I double click here, and I do a single click and a single click, and I try to connect back up, it's not letting me connect, because if I were to connect it, I would really only have 2 sides. I have to add at least one more vertice, and now I can connect back up, and now I have a 3-sided boundary. Now, if I don't like this, I could undo once, and it undoes that last click. So let's say I were to add in one more and then click here, you'll see a slightly different preview. Again, if I undo, let's say I try to add a 5th vertice, a 5th edge. Here I am trying to double click and it will not let me. So you will be prevented from creating more than 4 sides, but you will also not be able to create fewer than 3. Now, with this initial setup, it's not able to create it, but notice that if I start dragging these points in or even select and delete them, now we're able to get a preview. So you need at least 3 sides, no more than 4. And here's another situation where I might want to go ahead and drag one of those points in to clean up the boundary. Keep in mind that you can create boundaries off of an existing one. If I click on this point here and I do a double click, and then back to this point, it's using the existing edge as one of the boundary edges, and then I have my 3 more, and I can go ahead and click the check mark. I could even go from this corner to this corner over to this edge, and again, notice I've got 4 sides, 1, 2, 3, and 4. And I could always drag this around if I want to add a little precision. In addition to being able to snap to the points that are there, there's a second tool guide which allows you to select geometry, and this just means the edges of those surfaces. So if I turn on this mode and I click this edge, notice there's no preview coming out. And if I go ahead and select this edge as well, now I'm getting a nice connection between those. And if I want to further refine how those are connected, I could always drag these into some location and hit the check mark. So keep in mind that you can either connect to an endpoint, you could also start at a midpoint or somewhere along that line. If I switch back to this tool guide and I click this edge here, maybe I'll put a soft point there and then click on this one. Now, it didn't automatically select those other 3 the way it did before. But if I click on this corner and then this corner, Now it's able to do that. So in some situations, it can assume the edges that you're trying to use. In other situations, you just want to click on the points and you're almost tracing, but you don't have to click anything along here. You just click those endpoints, and now you can click the check mark. And as you can see here, we can continually build up this skin surface that we're trying to create, either by sketching lines with the first tool guide or by selecting edges. Thanks for watching and have a great day.